Japanese sailor Kazuo Sakamaki spent all night preparing to die at Pearl Harbor. First, he tied on his traditional cotton loincloth and dabbed cherry blossom perfume onto his skin. He then cut his fingernails and locks of inky black hair, ready to be placed on the family shrine. His final letter home had already been sent. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Sakamaki and his crewmate climbed into their midget submarine, 2 of 10 sailors in Japan's Special Attack Naval Unit, tasked with infiltrating Pearl Harbor on a one-way mission. While America's Pacific Ocean harbor erupts in flames above him and his 9 fellow submariners race toward glory, something has gone catastrophically wrong for Sakamaki's vessel. The war had barely started, and he was already facing a fate worse than death. In the late 1930s, as Japan rearmed and shifted its focus and ambitions toward the Pacific, the Naval Academy at Ejima accepted its latest batch of 300 cadets from more than 6,000 applicants. One of these was 20-year-old Kazuo Sakamaki, a tradition-bound young man who had a deep reverence for family, teachers, and most importantly, Emperor Hirohito. According to him, quote, "We were taught, and we came to believe, that the most important thing for us was to die manfully on the battlefield, as the petals of the cherry blossoms fall to the ground, and that in war there is only victory and no retreat." After a promotion to ensign in the spring of 1941, Sakamaki boarded the converted seaplane tender Chiyoda, docked at the Kure Naval Shipyard, where he found out he was one of the select few chosen to join an elite group, Special Attack Naval Unit. The training was brutal. For days on end, cadets like Sakamaki drilled torpedo launches, studied propulsion systems, and practiced escape procedures in airtight compartments. Every single one of the sessions was monitored and minutely reviewed by evaluators, who one by one pulled out those who simply couldn't keep up. Through it all, the young man passed every evaluation, followed orders without question, and watched the class shrink around him. It was also during these grueling months of training that he was introduced to the Empire's latest secret weapon, the midget submarine. First built in 1938, these vessels stretched barely 80 feet, a cigar-shaped hull so narrow that 2 men could fit inside through a 16-inch hatch at the conning tower. A duo of 18-inch torpedoes sat ready in the bow, each warhead packed with 1,000 pounds of explosives. The Japan Optical Manufacturing Company even managed to miniaturize a periscope down to just 10 feet while maintaining perfect clarity. Battery banks running along both walls drove the submarine to 23 knots on the surface, fast enough to close on any target. However, after these drained in just 55 minutes, with no generators and no backup power, the submarine would drift in the current until its mothership could find it and recharge it. As with all major naval advancements, production of nearly 400 of these vessels in different variants took place behind closed doors. Only a handful of officers had clearance to see the complete layouts of the Empire's creation. Even communications officers avoided naming them directly, burying references in code words like Koryu, dragon with scales, hiding these weapons of war in mythology. At Kure, Kazuo Sakamaki and his assigned crewmate, Warrant Officer Kiyoshi Inagaki, began learning the systems of their assigned mini-sub, HA-19. By then, it was the fall of 1941. Admiral Yamamoto addressed Sakamaki and the other men in the Special Attack Naval Unit and told them about their assignment, an attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. At the time, the base was the beating heart of American power in the Pacific. Nearly 100 ships were stationed there, including 8 battleships, 3 aircraft carriers, and dozens of destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. Over 300 aircraft sat on nearby airfields. More than 40,000 military personnel lived and worked across the base and surrounding installations. If war came, this was the fleet that would respond, and Admiral Yamamoto knew it. One blow to Pearl Harbor, and the Americans would be stuck repairing ships while Japan carved out an empire. In October 1941, orders arrived. 5 fleet submarines would serve as motherships, carrying their mini-sub counterparts across the Pacific, strapped tight to their pressure hulls with steel belts. Once off the coast of Oahu, the larger subs would submerge and release the mini-subs underwater, out of sight from American patrols. From there, each 2-man craft would slip into Pearl Harbor alone, navigate through the torpedo nets, and fire both of its warheads at the battleships moored in the shallows. But dissent ran through the ranks. One captain of the motherships, Kazuo Sasaki, watched the loading procedures with growing unease. To him, the added weight of the mini-subs pushed the hulls to their limits, reducing speed. Every rush checklist and skip trial only deepened his doubts. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, slated to lead the airstrike on the base, was even more direct, calling the submarine plan reckless. In rough water, they had a tendency to roll too easily. Their conning towers stuck out like targets, and they were nothing without their motherships. And if even one was spotted near Pearl Harbor, the entire element of surprise would be gone. Whatever the doubts of their higher-ups were, Sakamaki and Inagaki's mini-sub, HA-19, was mounted on I-24, a 348-foot long-range submarine. The two communicated via a phone line connecting their conning tower to the bridge. Between the hulls, an access cylinder let the crew pass gear and run final checks. On November 18th, the 5 I-class submarines slipped out of Kure Harbor, each with its mini-sub passenger on its back, bound for a target thousands of miles away. Commander Mochitsuro Hashimoto, captaining I-24, could feel his submarine struggling with the extra burden from the get-go. One night, a blow valve jammed, sending freezing seawater blasting through the opening. With the submarine plunging toward crush depth, engineers fought through flooding compartments until the valve broke free and it shot upward again, breaking the surface in an explosion of spray like a whale gasping for oxygen. But the real shock came when they inspected Sakamaki's HA-19 and realized one of her 2 torpedoes had been crushed. Whether it was from the rough seas or improper handling, it didn't matter. For 12 hours straight, crews scrambled across the submarine's slick deck, boots sliding on wet metal, the shouting of orders ringing in their ears as they used ropes and pulleys to inch the 1-ton replacement down the narrow boat. Through it all, the men timed their movements between wave crashes to muffle the splash, knowing any sound could alert enemy patrols. Mid-crossing, the final orders came through. The mini-subs would slip into Pearl Harbor just before dawn, navigate counterclockwise around Ford Island, and target the battleships moored in Battleship Row. If the American fleet tried to escape during the air attack, the mini-subs would be there to catch them in the harbor mouth. Upon hearing the details, Sakamaki recalled, quote, "I was astonished and felt as if suddenly petrified. The effect was like a sudden magic blow." Though the plan included a rendezvous after the attack on December 8th, 8 miles west of Lanai, where motherships would recover their mini-subs, the numbers didn't add up. After combat, after all the maneuvering in the vicinity of Pearl Harbor, the batteries would be long exhausted, and everyone knew it. That's when it hit Sakamaki. He was not expected to come back from this mission alive. Years later, Rear Admiral Hisashi Mito, commanding the Submarine Tender Division, spoke bluntly, quote, "In Japanese military language, Special Naval Attack Unit meant only one thing. These submariners were the first kamikaze. They just traveled underwater instead of through the air." By the night of December 6th, the motherships were finally in Hawaiian waters. The 5 submarines spread out within 10 nautical miles of the harbor mouth, while below deck, the mini-sub crews from the Special Naval Attack Unit prepared for launch. Sakamaki remembered the last letter he wrote to his family, which read, quote, "Today, I will shoulder one important mission, and diving into Pearl Harbor will sink the enemy's warships. The present daring enterprise is really the peak of joy. We are all completely affected by a feeling of self-sacrifice." Finally, everything was ready, and the 2 sailors climbed through the narrow hatch. But when the time came for the final systems check, they realized the gyro compass, the one instrument that could guide them through the dark water to their target, was inoperable. Inagaki tore into the mechanism, hands working frantically through the wiring, but nothing seemed to work. Without it, Sakamaki would have to steer from memory, pop the periscope up to check position, and depend on a magnetic compass that couldn't be trusted near a harbor built from steel. But when asked if he wanted to abort, Sakamaki's answer was immediate, quote, "On to Pearl Harbor." Around 3 a.m., one by one, the mini-subs dropped away from their motherships into the Black Pacific, with HA-19 being the last to launch. The moment they separated, the submarine's nose pitched down hard. For the next 2 hours, the duo fought to stabilize the submarine. When they finally felt steady enough to risk it, they rose to periscope depth, and Sakamaki looked through the scope, searching for the lights of Pearl Harbor. Instead, he saw the open ocean in every direction. In the midst of the chaos of their failing submarine, The vessel had actually spun 90 degrees off course and was now heading away from Hawaii entirely. Sakamaki tried to correct their course, but the magnetic compass swung wildly. Even as light began to spill across the Pacific, HA-19 was still fighting herself just outside the harbor's entrance. Through the periscope, Sakamaki spotted the cause: American destroyers cutting back and forth across the channel, their wakes churning the water so violently that he could barely hold course. Now he had two choices: wait for an opening that might never come, or charge straight through their patrol line. Pushing the throttle forward, spending what was left of their draining batteries as the sub sprinted for the gap, suddenly a metallic ping echoed through the hull, then another. The Wicks-class destroyer, USS Ward, had found them. Sakamaki ordered a crash dive, but it was too late. The first depth charge detonated off their starboard side, the blast wave slamming into HA-19 and causing it to roll violently. The second explosion came from below, lifting them up, then slamming them back down. Inside the cramped conning tower, Sakamaki was fighting to keep his footing when a third and much, much closer blast caused the submarine to buckle again. As white stars exploded across his vision, Kazuo Sakamaki lost consciousness. When Sakamaki came to, HA-19 shot ahead, racing for the harbor entrance once more. But Ward hadn't given up, and the destroyers sent more and more depth charges, each explosion hammering the hull like thunder. Sakamaki dove once again, counting the seconds, waiting for the attacks to stop. When silence finally returned, he eased HA-19 up to periscope depth, and what he saw through the lens made him forget the pain in his skull. Pearl Harbor was burning. Massive columns of black smoke rose from Battleship Row, so thick they blotted out portions of the sky. Orange flames crawled up the superstructures of trapped warships. USS Arizona had become an inferno, fire and smoke pouring from her twisted decks. Smaller explosions rippled through the destruction as ammunition cooked off, sending debris arcing through the smoke. The air attack had begun, and it succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. The adrenaline thrill he got from seeing the cornerstone of American power in flames drove Sakamaki to throw his submarine into gear, until it slammed into a coral reef and came to a violent stop, the bow breaching the surface. Ahead, the destroyer USS Helm turned toward them, its deck guns already swinging into position. Exposed and unable to move, HA-19 was now a perfect target. Sakamaki threw the engines into full reverse, fighting the controls as HA-19 groaned and scraped against the reef. Then, with a final wrenching shudder of metal on stone, the submarine broke free and slipped beneath the waves once more. Then came a sweet chemical smell of gas seeping from the battery compartments. Within minutes, the fumes filled the submarine's cramped interior. Eyes burning, lungs aching, both men dropped to their knees, gasping for untainted air that didn't exist. The temperature also spiked to 120 degrees and was rising by the second. The duo knew they had to redistribute weight or the submarine would sink. When they finally managed to stabilize, upon checking the weapon systems through tear-blurred eyes, the dizzy men discovered one final insult. The torpedo firing mechanism had failed. With no functioning weapons, they were now effectively powerless. Sakamaki had one option left: turn HA-19 itself into the weapon and ram the nearby USS Pennsylvania. But even this desperate plan crumbled. When Sakamaki tried to accelerate, HA-19 didn't surge toward the harbor. Instead, it began spinning in circles. Inside, the chlorine fog thickened until they couldn't even see their own hands. The last thing Sakamaki remembered was the submarine's motors still running, still spinning them in endless circles as the current caught them and pulled them away from Pearl Harbor, out toward the open sea. When Sakamaki finally awoke, he cracked the hatch for air, and a cool ocean breeze flooded the poisoned submarine. Through salt-crusted eyes, he saw land. For a moment, he thought he'd reached the rendezvous point off Lanai. But as his vision cleared, reality struck. Those weren't the right cliffs. This was Oahu's eastern shore, near Bellows Field. Realizing they'd drifted completely off course, Sakamaki tried starting the motors, but the batteries sparked once, twice, then seized with a pathetic whine. Moments later, HA-19 shuddered as her hull ground against sand. They were beached. The two sailors made their decision, destroyed the submarine. They rigged an explosive charge in the aft battery room. Sakamaki lit the detonator fuse, and both men jumped overboard. As the officer recalled, quote, "The water was cold. The waves were big. I could not move freely, and I swallowed salt water. 1 minute, 2 minutes. No explosion. Neither my aide nor I could shout to each other. Strength gradually went out of me. Then I saw my aide no more." As Warrant Officer Kiyoshi Inagaki was swallowed up by the water, before dawn on December 8th, the United States Army's Lieutenant P.C. Plyben and Corporal D.M. Akui, working beach duty, spotted someone swimming toward shore. Within hours, Kazuo Sakamaki had just become prisoner number 1 of the Pacific War. 3 days later, on the rainy morning of December 10th, a Navy salvage crew arrived to haul HA-19 off the reef. Once they'd towed it closer to shore, they would cut HA-19 into 3 separate sections and ship the pieces to Pearl Harbor for thorough analysis. Once there, the Americans found that despite damage to her rudders, torpedoes, propellers, and bow cutter, HA-19 remained structurally intact. At Pearl Harbor, the Navy stripped out her periscope, motor, and most original equipment, then began an unusual transformation, patching holes with parts salvaged from another midget sub that USS Monaghan had rammed. Workers installed electrical fixtures, fitted dummy batteries in a fake motor, and cut 22 viewing windows into the hull. In September 1942, the submarine arrived in pieces on the U.S. mainland. Reassembled and loaded onto a flatbed trailer in California, HA-19 began a new mission. The Navy built a catwalk alongside the sub, where Americans could climb up and peer through the windows. Inside, 2 mannequins in Japanese uniforms sat frozen at the controls, faces molded into what the display referred to as fierce samurai expressions. Draped in patriotic bunting and bearing the slogan, "Remember Pearl Harbor," HA-19 rolled through 41 states. Thousands upon thousands of people gathered in large crowds and were paid to gawk at the enemy weapon. Even President Roosevelt stopped to inspect it at Mare Island. By war's end, this strange traveling show had raised enough money to repair every ship damaged in the December 7th attack. Back in Japan, the imperial propaganda machine roared to life. The High Command claimed a midget submarine had sunk USS Arizona. A lie. 3 months after Pearl Harbor, Imperial headquarters announced the loss of 9 submariners, promoting each 2 ranks posthumously. Paintings and postcards glorified the submarine crews, with the press even christening them as the 9 war gods. But though the Navy knew that Kazuo Sakamaki, the 10th crew member, was alive and taken as a POW, the service refused to divulge any information about him, not even to his family. The Navy knew Sakamaki lived as a prisoner, but they buried the truth. When photos surfaced of the 10-man crew before their mission, officials carefully scrubbed Sakamaki's face from the image. It was almost as if he never existed. For Sakamaki, the shame cut deep. In American custody, he begged his captors to take his life, believing this to be the last honorable path as a captured Japanese officer. But 4 years of POW camps slowly changed him. He learned English, witnessed American newspapers openly criticizing their own government, an unthinkable act in wartime Japan. Other Japanese prisoners looked to him for leadership, and gradually his perspective shifted. As he later wrote, quote, "For what reason is it justifiable to say that Japanese military personnel who were taken as prisoners are unpatriotic and deserve death?" And so, when Kazuo Sakamaki, the first prisoner of war, returned to Japan in 1946, he was no longer the young ensign who'd sprayed himself with cherry blossom perfume, ready to give his life for the empire. The war had ended, and with it, his old beliefs.